Hey, family. Good evening, and welcome to another installment on what I like to call relevant conversations. And I'm your host, Bishop John Seldis. I am so pleased and proud to have the opportunity on these internets, out here on these internet streets, to do what it is that we do, and to do it with some of the most brilliant, smartest, talentedest. I mean, I get to. The great fun of my job is to spend time with some of the folk that we've asked to join us over these last number of years to talk about the stuff that's important to me. And I am so godly pleased and proud to be able to do it tonight and chop it up as I'm not one of the youths no more. I used to think I was one of the youths, and then now my grandbaby tell me, Daddy, no. She just tell me, Daddy, no, don't do that. So I be trying to text and use little emojis, and she be saying, So I try to be cool. I'm trying to stay current, sis. I'm trying to stay current, bro. I'm doing the best that I can. But I am godly proud tonight to bring to our platform this particular sister. We got the opportunity to meet a number of years ago. I think when we really sat down and talked, it must have been 2016, 2017. It was right after Ferguson. And you all know St. Louis, the Lou is my home. So, I was back there, doing what it is that we do. And we got to meet this sister and got to talk to her and share in some of the things she was doing. And I had been stalking her for a little bit, so I was doing it on the side. I was watching from a distance, and she, every time I'd see her, she's saying it and calling it just like it needed to be called. So I'm gonna bring her to the set and have her do a little introduction of herself. But let me tell you what I do know about her. She's a woman of faith, a spouse and a mother. And she's out here in these streets championing the cause of those who are on the margin, those who are in the positions some might call the least of these. She is the voice to those who are voiceless, and she's calling it like she see it, like the New Yorker that she is. I mean, using that New York twang on it. She's repping the New York. This sister, let me just bring it to the set. This is my friend, my sister. Sister Linda Sarsour. If we had a crowd, we would just give you some applause on it. We'd clap our hands and say thank you for the work that you already have done and how you rep our people in the way that you have done. Good evening, sis. Greet the folk and say hello.
Good evening, Bishop. I'm so happy and honored to just be here and talk to you. You contacted me and I said, I'm gonna make this work because I haven't chopped it up with my brother in a while. And I was like, this is a great opportunity to do that. So I'm just blessed to be here with you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's go back just for those who might be part of our audience who watching tonight and who may watch us once this is posted. By the way, we live in a couple of different platforms. We live Facebook, we live Twitter, and we're live on YouTube. And then you go to More Money CT, and you'll see this posted there as well. Let's go back. Let's go back to what makes you in this form that we know you. Because really, what called you to the streets? What said, okay, that's it. I'm coming out the house and I'm riding. I'm done. What was that moment? What happened?
Well, first of all, we got to be a bit more specific, Bishop. You talked about my New York twang. I'm from Brooklyn, so Brooklyn's a little bit different. You know what I'm saying? We all Brooklyn got a little special kind of twang and swag. And I appreciate that question. A lot of people know me. I've been a good troublemaker for over 22 years now. And what really brought me here and brought me to the streets, as you said, and a lot of times when we come to the street, or the first time we came to the street, we often come for our own people first. We come for people that look like us, that pray like us, that are from our communities. And so I came out, as a young organizer in the immediate aftermath of 9/11. Here is this horrific attack on our city in New York, a horrific attack on our country. We lose over 3,000 of our fellow Americans. We, as Muslim Americans and Muslim immigrants in New York City, are mourning with the rest of our city, the rest of the country, except the United States government has a different plan for us. They wanted to, in fact, blame all of us and somehow connect us to something that absolutely had nothing to do with us. And so they didn't do that just through rhetoric. They did that through practice. And so what they did is they sent every level of law enforcement and descended them upon the communities that I come from in Southwest Brooklyn. So here I am, a young organizer, college student, and I literally watched raids on coffee shops, raids on apartment buildings. You'd go to the mosque and women after women would show up and say, they came and picked up my husband. They came and took my son. They came and took my brother. And you started thinking to yourself, like, I was like, is the government kidnapping the men in our community? Like, what is the government doing right now? And so that was my radicalizing moment. And when I kind of came outside, really to defend my own people first, and then realizing through my journey to defend the rights of Muslim Americans and Muslim immigrants in this country, that this fight that I just found myself in has been a long fight in this country, centuries old fight for indigenous people, Black people. When we talk about the ways in which law enforcement treats the communities that we come from, this wasn't a new fight. It may have been a new one for me, but it wasn't a new fight. And so I found myself coming to the street for my own people first, and now seeing other communities of color, other marginalized people, also my people. And so that's why you saw me in places like Ferguson. I sincerely see a connection between this idea of what liberation is for me, for my people. I'm also, as you know, Palestinian. I come from a lineage of oppressed people like that. I got that blood in my veins, and seeing that beautiful synergy that happened during that kind of uprising in Ferguson, that solidarity between young Palestinian children in Gaza, sharing with their Black sisters and brothers in Ferguson how to protect yourself from tear gas. It was a very moving experience for me. So I've been in the streets ever since. I've been outside ever since. And, something that you said that is also important is, you talked about being a woman of faith. A lot of people always ask me, they said, how you be outside? You'll stand in front of the National Guard, you outside with the police, you say all the things that need to be said. And I said, it's because I'm a woman of faith. I fear God and only God. I don't fear no man or woman on this earth. I don't fear no police chief or mayor or president. And that for me has been why I'm able to kind of keep doing this work, even in the face of a lot of, Bishop, when you was with me back when we did that little college tour in Trinity. I mean, the people was outside. They didn't really want me in that area. And, we moved forward and we had an incredible experience out there, again, speaking truth, because the people want the truth. And that's why they want to shield you from the truth tellers. But I'm grateful that I'm still able to do the work that I do.
Absolutely. We've talked a little bit about this. I want to go back. A couple of things you said just resonated with me. I want to go back. I've heard you talk, and we've talked about this, that moment when 9/11 was happening. Oh Lord, it's happening. And I can tell you the story I had of getting a call from my beloved who called me. I was in fact that morning that 9/11 occurred, I was at a church meeting for my denomination, and I was gathering with some other faith leaders, some other clergy. Wife called, said a plane done run into the World Trade Center. I said, what? And so, we started scrambling. I said, okay, I'll call you back. And everything was on. The first plane had hit, and then the second plane hit. And then I ran over to our denominational center, our headquarters, and I was on the phones. We were trying to, be helpful and resource folk who were here in Connecticut. And all of a sudden, there was a concern that our state capital, something may have been going down there. And all of a sudden, while I was on saving the whole world, I said, where are my children? And I laid everything down easily, and I slid, and I dipped, and I got to the house, and I huddled with my wife and my children in that moment. Could you talk a little bit about, and I've heard you talk about this, walking past your mosque and seeing it closed, trying to get from where you were at, trying to get home because there wasn't no public trans in New York City. Could you talk a little bit about that moment? Because I think there's something very critically important when it happens everywhere, but then it happens to you. It happens where you live, happens at your spots.
Mm-hmm. You know, I was a college student at the time. I was attending Kingsborough Community College, which is on Manhattan Beach. And it was a predominantly people of color, lots of young people. And I was in a chemistry class in the morning, and my professor was really stern. And he was one of those don't have no electronics. And mind you, back in them days, not a lot of people had electronics anyway, but he was very adamant about the beepers, which no young people even know what a beeper is these days. But he was like, you can't have electronics. He's like, if I ever see an electronic in this classroom, that's it. You withdraw from the class. He was really strict. And that morning, his cell phone rang, and he pulled it out of his pocket. He answered it, and we all thought it was the strangest thing. I said, he was so adamant about electronics that he answered his cell phone, walks out of the classroom, and 15 minutes passes by and this man never comes back. And later on, we find out that it's because his daughter was in the World Trade Center, and he got a call from her, which is why he answered the call. And so we left the classroom after 15 minutes because he never came back. So we didn't understand what was going on. And there was no Twitter, no Facebook. We didn't have flat screen TVs in our college campus to know what was going on. So as I left my college campus, I went up to the security kiosk and I asked this young black man, security guard, I said, what's going on? He said, listen, I have no idea. All I know is something about an airplane hit a building. That's all he kind of had. And that's the information that he had. And as I was walking out of my college campus, remember, we're right across from Manhattan. So I literally had my hands held out, and I literally was catching burnt pieces of paper literally falling from the sky. It was like a little rainstorm of this burnt paper that was literally coming to us from across the river. And, there was no public transportation in New York. And remember, I want people to understand the level of chaos, uncertainty, confusion, because remember, we couldn't go on Twitter and know what was going on. So imagine just walking in the streets alongside your neighbors, your fellow students, and you just have no idea what's happening in the world around you. It was almost like doomsday, like the world was ending. And by the time I walked from Sheepshead Bay all the way down to Bay Ridge, where my community is, and literally passed by my mosque, and all of a sudden I looked up and there was like a gate. And I said, what? I said, I didn't even know my mosque had a gate. It was that kind of situation because my mosque never had the gate down. It was always a place that was open to everyone. I also saw a lot of businesses that were closed. Now, mind you, we're talking Tuesday. By the time I got there, it's around noontime. I said, what do you mean? Everybody should be open by now. That really was that. That's when that feeling sinked in for me. Something in my stomach told me this is something much more than what we think it is. And that's by the time I got over to my mom's house, who was watching my children at the time as I was going to school. And then I walked in, my mom runs out of the house without her hijab, which of course, hijab is her, Muslim head covering. And I said, where are you going without your hijab? She said, we can't wear it right now. I said, what is happening here? Because she was jumping into a car to go pick up my brother from a middle school that was kind of far away from where we lived. And she was just so worried about his well-being because it's not a neighborhood we're from. We're not really familiar with that community. And then I went inside. My son, who's like 2 years old, is sitting in front of the TV. And he said, Mom, fire, fire. And then the minute I sat down in front of that television is when I finally realized what was going on, because all the headlines were the Muslim terrorist, Islamic terrorist, the Muslims. And I said, oh no, here we go. And really all the fears that I had about what was going to happen over the next few days was what really happened. I mean, it became a reality, like FBI, NYPD, Intelligence, National Security Council. I didn't even know half those law enforcement agencies. They literally somehow descended and decided that the community that I was born and raised in, those people that were my neighbors, somehow, some way were connected to this horrific attack.
Thank you, sis. I just want to impress on folk that it was said by a famous guy who quoted, they'll come for this one, they'll come for that one, they'll come for that one, and they'll come for that, then they'll come for you, right? And there's something very, very clear when it can happen to everybody else, but then when it happens in your neighborhood, the feelings that I had when Newtown happened, here in Connecticut, and people were calling, and saying, "Oh, you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm in Hartford, kind of far down to Newtown from Hartford, but I get with you, and we're fine." And then the moment when for me, it all rang true is when Mike Brown got killed, and I get the text from my brother in St. Louis, saying the crib is on fire. In fact, my brother was in California at the time. He's like, dot, 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 Ferguson. And then I turned on the TV to find out, the place I grew up right in the little town right next door to Ferguson. So all of that is where I learned how to drive on them streets that tanks were rolling down. And got the call from family. I had my sister-in-law and a brother-in-law live in Ferguson. I got nieces and nephews. That's home. That's family. And so I had to get home and get about to doing what it is that we do. And one of the interesting things I was standing faced off with some of the popo down there, and he said, "Yeah, we'd be fine if it weren't for you outside agitators." I said, "Well, let me just say this right here. Let me just say this right here." Because that's how we talk in St. Louis, right here. You may say that about some other folk, but I'm third generation preacher. My granddaddy pastored people in these streets around here. I know the back way to go from Ferguson into Kinlock. I mean, this is where I'm born and raised. You ain't talking about no outside agitator when you talking about me. I remember when this little complex wasn't even here. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It is that moment when it comes that you can't. It's what Fannie Lou Hamer said. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. It's that moment that drives you to the point that you got to do something, right? Because it's a lot. You can have a whole lot of conversations in the kitchen. That's what happens in the place and space that I grew up. A lot of opinions at the barbershop and the beauty shop. Everybody know what to do. But then what will you do? What are you doing? Right. And so it's the challenge of our folk to move past. It's not that you're not going to be afraid. Right. It's not that they might not come for you. It's not that they might not, bust a cap on you. Right. It's not that you don't have some trepidation as you move, but you move. Though you are afraid, though you may have concerns, you move anyway because it is the right thing to do, and your soul ain't right until you do move, right? And so I wonder, could you talk a little bit about that as your move went from starting at home with the Muslim community, right? Certainly you wasn't unaware of what was happening in Palestine. Mm-hmm. You wasn't unaware of that right there, but you in your neighborhood, and then then you took off, because that's next time I saw you was in front of City Hall, mm-hmm. championing the cause. You were downtown long before the Women's March and Black Lives Matter. Talk a little bit that movement from Brooklyn to your next spots, and then to the Women's March.
The first time, it was like a couple of months after 9/11, my mentor, may God rest his soul, Dr. Ahmed Jabed, he was an OBGYN doctor and a very important, prominent leader here in the New York City area, has founded so many of our Muslim organizations and was really outside. He actually delivered over 5,000 babies, and I was one of them. And as I grew older, he became my mentor as a leader in the community. One day we were at a press conference. I just happened to be standing there, Bishop, and this man passes me a mic. And I had a mic in my hand for the first time. And, of course, I had a mic in my hand as a young person at a play, in my school play and things like that. But this is the first time that here I was in a press conference that was there to defend the rights of my people. And there was an elder in our community that looked at me and saw something in me, and he passed me a mic. And I'm telling you, I got that mic in my hand and I spoke my heart and I spoke my truth. And I shocked myself. Like I literally almost like did a triple take on myself. Like, did I just do that? Did I just say that? And there was something in me, this almost revelation that I had that night. I said, you know what? Something happened today. And that revelation to me was that God had chose me that day. There was no way that voice just came out of me by myself. There was no way that I did not say, and I was literally on a roll. Like I felt so articulate. I was so confident in what I said. And I felt like I did my people so proud that day. And so that day I decided that God had chosen me. And that took me on a journey. And I said, I got this powerful voice. What am I going to do with this voice? And the first kind of step that I did in New York, and that kind of put me on a trajectory, is I started building relationships. This is not just about me being outside. It's about who am I outside with? how am I going to get to know people on a level where when we say, Bishop, in the movement, we must love and protect one another. I can't love and protect you if I don't know you. And so I went on a journey to East New York, to Brownsville, to the Bronx, around. I went to the North Shore of Staten Island, and I built with community leaders and organizers and learning about the plights of other people and other communities. And I found that a lot of the plights that were happening were very similar to my own people. Started being strategic and saying, wait a minute, you want to end stop and frisk, which is a policy that racially profiles young Black and brown people. Wait a minute, but my people are saying end unwarranted surveillance by the police department of our community. That's a religious profiling. Guess what? Let's bring that work together, because really at the end of the day, it's about profiling our community. It's about targeting communities of color and marginalized people. And that work just led me to doing more work outside of New York. I went and worked for a national organization doing advocacy. Same thing, started building with national organizers and national Black-led organizations and Latino-led organizations and other marginalized people. And I was just in it. Like I was all in, like I was on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I wanted to change the world. And at some point I got older and I was like, wait a minute, I may not be able to change the world, but I think I could do and plant some seeds at least, and at least be part of be able to say I was one of the people in my generation that took the kind of mantle just to continue the work of the folks that came before me. And I became, what we call now, the cool people call intersectional organizer. I was doing intersectionality before people were saying intersectionality. Now, that was a term, of course, as you know, coined by a brilliant Black woman, Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, but people weren't using the terminology in the movement. And of course, it got cool in 2016 when Trump came along. But I always understood that you couldn't fight for economic justice if you didn't also fight for racial justice and climate justice and access to healthcare. Like these things all for me made sense because I worked in a community that had Black Muslims, people who had unemployment issues, people who didn't have access to affordable housing. Like it wasn't just about, oh, the government is targeting us because we're Muslims. We also had other issues that we were dealing with that other communities were also dealing with. So I just became a troublemaker. I'm a good troublemaker. I built strategies. I worked on policy issues. I helped pass legislation in New York. I work on national legislation. And I also know how to bring people together. And it's one of the things that people see very threatening about me. As someone who's a Muslim American Palestinian woman, somehow I resonate across a lot of communities. And once you're able to bring people together, especially when you're able to move some white people, specifically white women, that's when you are a threat to society. And that is when the opposition was like, oh, no, sir, not her. This lady is going to have to be taught some lessons. And so that's been my journey. My journey is about, like, I could pick up the phone right now in every state in this country, maybe not like Alaska yet, but most states, and really be able to pick up the phone. If Bishop says, I'm going to, Montana, or I'm going to, South Dakota, I got you, Bishop. There are incredible human beings in those states doing incredible work on a lot of issues that we care about. I got people's numbers. I say happy birthday to people. Like when I can, I see people online, like just keeping that relationship alive and making sure that also, giving people their flowers while they're here. A lot of our movement organizers, including those in Ferguson, some of them committed suicide. Some of them have been murdered. Some people now have severe mental health issues. People who have been burnt out, who had to leave the movement. There's been so much trauma because we expect the most traumatized people to also lead us in our movements, oftentimes with little and no support. So those are kind of like, my journey has not just been about building power and kind of quote winning, but also like, how do I, protect my own people, my sisters and brothers and family in the movement. That's really every day they're on the front lines. And, oftentimes they're sacrificing family, they're sacrificing career, they're sacrificing time, and really sacrificing their life in many places. And so there's a lot that kind of has kept me here. And there's so many things that I've evolved into believing and thinking and wanting to do as I've gotten older. But the one thing that has never changed for me is I'm definitely going to speak the truth, no matter the consequences.
Yes, and you do speak that truth. You have been one of those examples of folk who see the connections, not just where you live at, and not just cross town, cross the borough, cross town. Okay, it might be easy to connect up here in Connecticut to New York or over in Jersey, But you've been one of those that has also made the global connection. And I
Mhm.
talk about this a lot, that the struggle is not just our individual struggle or our community struggle. Yes, it is. And it is also similarly the struggle of folk in Palestine. I was talking with a person who was opposing some of my articulations.
Mhm.
Uh-huh. And so she named, it's dangerous over there, and you were there, blah, blah, blah. And this is when we were on the ground in Palestine, Israel. And I said, listen, let me just say this right here so that you are clear. First of all, I'm a Black man in America. I know what it feels like to walk streets here in America. When I'm in Jerusalem and I'm walking on the east side of Jerusalem, I do the Negro nod. Brothers and sisters do the Negro nod back at me. I'm at home. In the same way, when I walk on West Jerusalem, right now, you may suffer me because I got green dollar to pay.
Mhm.
But your eyes is on me, hucking me down like I'm in the suburbs on the wrong side of town at the wrong time of day. All right, I feel that same kind of energy. I knew who were the oppressed in places like Palestine, Israel. I know what that feels like to walk in those streets. I know what it feels like to feel that same feeling in the favelas in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. I know that same feeling when I'm in Brixton in London. That's that same feeling. So our connection, our work, our striving has to be for not only our communities here, but to see ourselves and to see our solidarity with those in places and spaces we maybe never will go. It was amazing, sis. You were there. It was amazing to get the text from the brothers and sisters in Gaza, who told my nieces and nephews in Ferguson, go get the expelled canisters of the tear gas, read the serial numbers, and then they had them. There's a certain kind of thing you do with one kind of serial number when you're trying to get the tear gas out your eyes, as opposed to a different kind of canister with a different serial number. By the way, all those serial numbers trace back to manufacturers here in the United States. Right. We were using weapons on citizens in this country. Talk a little bit about your move and your understanding as you were moving from 9/11 and those moments into this kind of broader citywide work, and then it's the understanding that it is not just where you at, but it's where your people at, and where you rep people across the world.
That's right, Bishop. Just so that your listeners know that you're doing your due diligence today, so you ain't shy to ask me the hard questions, and I'm going to answer all the good ones. And you know, one of the things that I realized as I was doing my work around police accountability and looking at militarism within the United States and looking at how the United States government was treating American citizens as enemy combatants, and we saw that on the streets of Ferguson. We're talking about full-fledged army riot gear. We're talking about actual tanks that were rolling in community. We were talking about actual tear gas that we see thrown around, grenades. I mean, it was a war scene, and you saw it with your own eyes. I went to Ferguson. Nobody can deny me what my eyes have seen. And you cannot deny what your eyes have shown you on videos from social media that young citizen journalists on the ground were posting. And that's what I saw in Ferguson. And I saw that across the country. We saw it in Portland. We saw it in New York. We saw it in the streets of Louisville, Kentucky. I lived in Louisville for 5 months during the fight for Breonna Taylor, during the year of a pandemic. And I watched how the LMPD also treated its citizens like enemy combatants, and watched how the federal government sent National Guards against an already impoverished people in a place like the West End of Louisville. And I've seen this over and over again. And what I know, Bishop, is that one of the things that is important to me as an American is understanding the Pentagon budget and our military budget. Every day we fight for healthcare in America, and they tell us we got no money for healthcare. We say, why are you closing hospitals and closing schools in places like Chicago? They say, because we don't have money. Our nurses are fighting for contracts. Our teachers are fighting for fair pay, and they keep telling us we don't got the money. But you got billions of dollars to put and invest into wars across this world. I mean, all of a sudden we had endless money to send to the Ukraine, but then we have people that are literally suffering in this very country that every day we turn our backs on them. a lot of times, bishops, people will say to people like you and me, well, why are you so obsessed with the state of Israel? Why is everybody always talking about Palestine? There are other countries in this world that commit human rights violations against their people. And you know what, Bishop? They would be 100% correct in saying that. But you know what? I do not fund Saudi Arabia to engage in human rights violations. We don't fund North Korea to do human rights violations against their people. We condemn them and stand against them, but we don't fund those. But you know what we do fund? We do fund the military occupation of the Palestinian people. The same tear gas that they threw at the kids of Ferguson, they've been throwing at the children of Palestine for 75 years. They have displaced, they have continued to steal land, to literally physically remove people from their homes. We just watched this past week pogroms, literally burning down homes with people in them, cars in places like Hawara, which is outside of Nablus. We're watching this in real time. If you were someone who was against Donald Trump, then you got to be against this administration in Israel right now. They are absolute neo-fascists right now. These are people who are homophobic. They are anti-women, and they are unapologetic about it. And they are telling you straight in your face, destroy the Palestinians. You have actual prime ministers right now who are on the record inciting violence and speaking of violence, including one who's coming to the United States of America to raise money in potentially the next week here. So I always say to people, don't ask me why I'm so obsessed with the state of Israel. I say, why not? Number one, I'm a Palestinian bishop. So of course you would be oppressed. You would be obsessed with the oppressor of your people. So obviously I'm Palestinian and I want to defend my people, and I'm going to call Israel an apartheid state. In fact, if I didn't, you should probably think that that's not normal. If I wasn't angry at the oppressor of my people, that would be something that people should think is not normal. And also as Americans, I say to the American people, forget about whether you have empathy for Palestinians or not, or whether you care to know Palestinians. But what you should be outraged is that your hard-earned taxpayer dollars, literally, like everybody in this country works hard. Inflation's at an all-time high. And our tax dollars are going to oppress a people. These are people living under military occupation. They have no control over their borders, no control over their airspace. They don't have control over things like water. I mean, Gaza, for people who are into climate justice, this is an uninhabitable piece of land that doesn't even have barely access to clean water right now. And so these are it's 50% of the population of Gaza, which is the largest open air prison in the world. Our children under the age of 16, like, we should say to ourselves, like, where is our moral compass as Americans? And what I do know, Bishop, is you and I have one. And if that means somebody's going to call us something for having that moral compass, you can call me what you want. But I know when I face my Lord and my Lord says, where were you when this injustice came? I'm going to tell my Lord, I was using every blessing, every talent that you gave me. You gave me a voice, I used it. You gave me hands that move, I used my hands. I used my feet. I used my intellect. Everything that I have to protect your creation. And I ask people all the time, when you see injustice, when you're walking down the street, you see homeless people, you hear about undocumented people being stripped from their families, you hear about a young Black boy killed by police. Where is your moral compass? Who gets to dictate to you what is right and what is wrong? And I always say to people, anytime you are about to say something and there's a fear in you, that is the moment to sit and reflect on where your moral compass and who gets to dictate what your moral compass is and which way that it points. And I say to people, if you are a people of faith and if your moral compass is the Lord and justice and love and equity, which I believe are at the center of every faith, we would be in a much better place, Bishop, and nobody would be questioning us standing up for justice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I tell my folk and people I'm around, listen, if I'm big and bad enough, and I do claim that, big and bad enough, to talk about my own government, then who are you to tell me that if I have an opinion about somebody else's government and what they're doing wrong, I'm gonna talk about it. I'm very clear. The struggle is on multiple fronts. We have certainly what we've been engaged in and involved in around police brutality, overreach, and all of the stuff that's been at the core and at the center of Black Lives Matter movement. We are also women, folk who are same gender loving. The attack on women's bodies and the rights for women to make decisions about what they need to do and be in the world with their own bodies. We are also in a struggle against what truth and what the young people call facts are. Now, you can have opinions about it, and we can differ on any number of things, but there's very few differences about what the facts are. Let's tell the truth. This country came about because of genocide, white supremacy, and the legacy of slavery and land dispossession. That's how the United States of America came to be. And we got folk here who want to first of all say you can't say gay. CRT is a threat to humanity and to our form of democracy. And all of the rhetoric around whose history and what history is taught in our schools, there's a whole lot here that actually is unsettling for me. That the struggle really is about, for me anyway. Let me just talk about, for me, is to arrest, to disrupt what I think are the ways in which a narrative is being painted or trying to be painted that is not the truth of not only my experience, but millions and millions and millions of others and their experience of empire in the world as we know it and see it and live in it today. And I wonder what's your opinions in relation to this struggle, CRT, but whether we do intersectionality work. And thank you, Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, for a conversation that occurred when I was in college in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
That CRT literally was an old conversation that somehow became mainstream, and then they tell it wrong, right? They engage it in quite the opposite, because why? I heard one of the leading congresswomen, she said, because we don't want little white kids to be made to feel bad. What?
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. Could you share a little bit? What's your thought about that?
There was about 2 years ago, I saw a textbook in Texas that was teaching the young people in like middle school grades that slaves were migrants to the United States. I mean, they're not only are they trying to ban the history, and oftentimes they're trying to change the history. They don't want to tell the history the way it was told. And for me, I always say to people all the time is, if you don't tell the history, if you don't understand your history, then you are doomed to repeat the history. And this country wants to keep repeating the history because they go from community to community. I mean, some communities stay on the chopping block, but then they add some as the kind of generations go by. A lot of people said this around the Donald Trump era. And I tell people that an era lasts for a little while. It's not like a 4-year thing or a 1-year thing. It could be a 10-year thing, but this is the last gasp of white supremacy. White supremacy is losing foot here because we are on the verge of becoming a majority minority country. And that's really what they're reacting to here. They're reacting to this idea that one day, very soon, Bishop, people like you and me are going to be in charge, and we are going to be the majority in this country. And instead of them believing that when you and I are in the majority, that we are going to build a just nation, we are going to, in fact, build a project here that actually respects the dignity of not only the original people of this land, but those who are living with us now and those that we will welcome into our land. They believe that if we become the majority, that somehow we are going to take on the characteristics of our oppressor, which is them. And they don't understand that we are bigger than that we have a bigger mission here, and that we are not, in fact, people who will ever take on the characteristics of those that you named earlier, people who founded a nation based on genocide and displacement and literally stealing the dignity from people and all the bad things that we have done over time, excluding Chinese from this country in federal legislation, interning Japanese Americans, engaging in Jim Crow, and all the things we continue to do, like mass incarceration. They don't know that we are a people that believe in a world where we may not even need prisons. We may not even need police, because we believe in the potential of whole human beings who have everything that they need to thrive, that we wouldn't live in a land with crime or people who would have to go to circumstances, and we would be rooting out all the root causes of poverty, of crime, of the trauma that our people have experienced. So they don't believe in us in the way that we do. And so what they're doing right now is they're maintaining whatever control that they have over our stories, over who we are, where we come from, because they believe that is power. And what I do know is that there's a lot of people out in our communities that are teaching. There are freedom schools and people taking matters into their own hands. I'll say this to parents, and I say this to all of you. I hope that there is not a parent in America, I don't care, black, white, brown, who actually allows their children to go to public school and then stops there. I never allowed the public school to be the full education that my children receive. And by the way, I'm in the New York, I'm a product of the New York City public school system. And I commend every teacher that I've had, because I've had an incredible experience in New York City and I've learned a whole lot. But I still teach my kids at home. You know, my kids knew, don't you ever come home telling me nothing about no Christopher Columbus. I told them Christopher Columbus was, he was a man who committed massacre, that Christopher Columbus was not a good man. I taught my kids that at a very early age, because they tried to come home and tell me something about Thanksgiving, and I had to sit them down. I said, there was never a, you do take this and take that. And we sat at the table and we ate turkey together. That's my responsibility as a parent, you know, being able to teach my kids about enslavement. My kids came home talking to me about slaves. I said, slaves? I said, there was no slaves in Africa. They didn't bring slaves from Africa. They enslaved African people. These are human beings that had culture. They had language. They were, some of them were members of the royal families. They didn't care who they took in Africa. And now my kids, they don't go around saying they were slaves. They were enslaved people. That's my responsibility, Bishop, to teach my children the things that I want them to learn. I talk to my kids about the suffragist movement when the Women's March was happening, the suffragists, and everybody's like, yeah, the woman got the right to vote. Let's do a 100-year anniversary, whatever anniversary. I said, I don't do no anniversaries. I do the anniversary when all women got the right to vote. I don't just want to celebrate when the white ladies got the right to vote. That's not winning for me. When anyone's left behind, that is not a win. That's my responsibility to teach my children these things. And so I also caution parents as they listen to this fight about, you know, critical race theory and all the other kind of, there's even fights in California around ethnic studies, people that are trying to ban things like ethnic studies around Middle Eastern studies, Asian American, Pacific Islander, etc., because they don't even want to add to the story. They don't want the story to be colorful. I still tell people that, yes, we're going to continue the fights, but you also got to take responsibility as a guardian and a parent to also be part of creating a holistic educational experience for your children. Get your own books, teach your own children, take some couple of hours out of the week and say, hey, this week, you and me are going to have a conversation about whatever topic you want to have. That's what I did with my kids. My kids read books, and you know what my kids would do? They would put them in their book bag secretly and take it to school and be like, my mom made me read this book. And sometimes the teachers would be like, oh, that's interesting. Or sometimes they'd be like, yeah, we can't really teach that book in the school. But the point is, my kid got to learn it. And that's the important thing, that we take our own responsibility for our children.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a very interesting day we're in, where the battlegrounds, the traditional battlegrounds are yet there, right? We were right there on the line for the least of the marginalized, and the conversations that are afoot around what our alleged democracy is. This is a 200 and some odd year experiment, right? And Lord knows it ain't perfect. When they wrote a constitution where Black people were 3/5 human, that was all, and they understood that wasn't for real. They were doing it for the vote, right? That they're all upset that Black people and brown people and red people and yellow people are now beginning to think about, do we have common interest? You're absolutely correct. In probably our lifetime, for folks of color will be the majority populated peoples in this United States. That is a fact. So what now? The opportunity that we have to actually, I say to people, you know, what we have didn't just drop out of heaven. Mm-hmm. We built it. That's when right. I say we, let me be clear. The building was on the backs of some of our people, and making sure that other people got what they wanted out the deal was their reality. If in fact it was built, it can be deconstructed and then reconstructed so that it is inclusive of all of us, and that it is not that hard to figure out in some of our communities what is really needed are jobs. Mm-hmm. What is really needed is healthcare. What is really needed is affordable, livable, reasonable, stable housing. I mean, it's not rocket science in a land that makes as much money as we do, with as much wealth and as much stolen stuff, right? Look like we ought to be able to make it. Let me say it this way: we ought to be able to do better.
Absolutely.
Right? We ought to be able to do better. We're on our last little round. I ain't gonna hold you too much longer, but could you talk a little bit about you and Sister Tamika and others? Y'all led that women's march. I'm gonna just say that right there. In spite of all the talk and the wonk, y'all was out there doing the work. And then when George Floyd, the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery moment hit, you all decided to go down to Kentucky and really spend some time down there, doing the work, and got some stuff done. Got some wins, took some hits.
Mm-hmm.
What's on the movement front now, as you see it? Where are we? Assess the landscape right now, and talk about talk a little bit about where you see where we need to be going and where we need to be heading.
Bishop, I'm going to try to kind of be optimistic in this moment, but I will say, the current state of affairs of our movements are, a bit bleak, a bit chaotic, a bit confused, in my opinion, as an organizer and as a strategist. One of the things I was very afraid of when Donald Trump was defeated was people going back to brunch. And people now not understanding who the enemy is. The politics confuses us about who the enemy is, and also decenters the people that we were fighting for in the first place. And so if you notice that the types of mobilizations that we're seeing right now are nothing in comparison to what we saw when people saw that Donald Trump was in fact the quote enemy at that time. And even during the kind of uprisings of 2020, where we saw people really on the streets around the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. Remember, that was still during a year when Donald Trump was president of the United States of America. And so I want people, the kind of where we are right now is getting back to what we were taught by Dr. King and the principles of Kingian nonviolence, right? One of the principles of nonviolence is you fight against injustice, not the people doing injustice. You fight evil, not those doing evil. So that means you get away from the individuals, right? The individual police chiefs, the individual mayors, the individual presidents, and you actually go back to the essence of what we're fighting here, which is racism and militarism and ableism and Islamophobia and anti-Semitism and all the root causes of hatred and division that our country has sown for so long. That you go back to alleviating poverty and you demanding housing and permanent housing for people versus worrying about who's in office and who's not in office. And I think where we need to go from here, got to go back to building power, got to get away from the silos. You can't tell me you do racial justice work and not do also climate work. When we watch, for example, what's happening in Georgia right now with Cop City is at the intersections of racial justice, at the intersections of protecting a forest, of climate justice. It's at the intersections of building power for a community, protecting a community from this law enforcement training institute that will probably be trained to do even more bad to our people all across the country. And so that is an example of a fight where we have to get all people on board to understand how we are at the intersection of a fight like that. And so for me, I'm looking for more power building. I'm looking for people to get back out onto the streets, doing more political education, building deeper relationships and getting off the internet. The internet is a dangerous place, Bishop. It's a place full of disinformation, misinformation. And oftentimes people in our movements do take on the characteristics of our oppressor. We are into this cancel culture, got a lot of critics without credentials out there critiquing people who are actually trying to do something. And I say to people all the time, listen, when we say we're all we got, we really are, Bishop, all we got. So you know what? Me and Bishop might disagree sometime, but what I'm looking for in a movement is unity. But I don't believe unity is uniformity. Just because we want unity doesn't mean we all got to be the same. Doesn't mean we all got to be on the same lane. We just got to be united on some principles. Do we want true liberation and freedom for our people? Do we truly want to live in a country that dignifies us and actually treats us as whole human beings? That's what I want. And you may think that there's another way to get there, and that's cool with me. But if we can unite around that and see each other as sisters and brothers, as family, I think we could do a lot of work. But right now, for me, you know, working on these individual cases is also still important. Right now, we're working on, you know, we have a big national campaign called Boycott Black Murder. Gun violence is an epidemic, and it's actually happening across the country, not just through some of the mass shootings that we see, but in Black and brown communities. And we are the solution. We are public safety, and only we can work on these issues. So I'm very proud to have had a summit just the other day on Saturday, and it was packed to the brim. And I was literally posted on social media. I said, you know what? When people ask you, where are the people on black crime and brown on brown crime? They were right there, and they're in every corner of this country. So that's a big thing that I'm working on, and something that I'm very passionate about. And then working on, you know, listen, no matter what we do, we can't get away from it, Bishop. 2024 is right around the corner. You got to start now. We can't just wake up in 2024 and then start being like, okay, now we got to get people to the polls. Got to register the voters now. Got to have the conversations now. And also focus the people on the local elections. At the end of the day, we saw what happened in New York. Because of New York, we lost the House, right? People said, oh, New York, the blue state. Nowhere is blue. Nowhere's safe anymore. So we got to be consistent in our work, especially in electoral kind of organizing, and seeing that as a tool in our toolbox. And so, of course, over the coming year, that's kind of a big area that I want to focus on. Even though I do national organizing, I'm so disappointed in New York that I kind of feel like I got to put my boots back on the ground in New York City and in New York State to try to help us win that House back. But I think right now, really the focus right now is just for us to really set up some power building, win back the House again in 2024, hopefully put in you know, if we have the House and we bring in more progressives in the House, we can probably do more work for our people. And again, these are short-term goals, because we know that this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. But that's kind of some of the things I'm thinking about right now.
Yes, this, of course, you know, you and I are faithful folk. Mm-hmm. And so I'm thinking about the way in which scripture says, you know, the race is not given to the swift, to the strong, but to the ones that are endured to the end. And so the push for me is to keep moving, keep organizing, keep finding the spaces and places where we can connect to one another's center spots, right? Where we can connect to each other's interests. No need of me working and then voting against my own interest and the interest of the people around me and the interest of the people who are like me. And so it's somehow or another. I'm in a small town, you know, a small city. Hartford is a small town, and yet we're undergoing right now our municipal elections, and you talk about, you know, staying, you know, doing the work locally, and every 4 years, you know, it happens just like it does. We start having conversations. Those who want to run start jumping out there in the fray, and then we'll have an election. You know, we spend about 6 or 8 months, maybe a year, talking about it, and then they go away, right? And the conversation about holding folk that we elect accountable goes away with that. And so part of what you're naming is, how do we now begin to articulate what does accountability look like? If we're going to talk about, you know, not sowing seeds and putting money and defunding the police, I said to my folks, let's have that conversation, because quite frankly, the two largest line items in my city's budget is that that is related to the Board of Education, and that which goes to the police. Well, how come we can't talk about how that gets funded and choices that get made? And the choices that get made are made by the folk we have elected to represent our interests. Can't y'all see that? And if they're doing something that's not representing who we think, you know, I'm tired of living in occupied, you know, in an occupied or semi-occupied state in my own community, in our own neighborhood. And so, yes, I have something to say about how that should happen, because if I lived in other places, they have something to say, and they don't have the same kind of policing, stop and frisk and broken window strategies, broken window policing, these failed strategies that only target Black men and brown men and Black women and brown women. I don't know what's up with that you can't name it. And for me, it's not rocket science. This is not rocket science at all. And electoral politics and electoral work is not the be all and end all, but it sure is a good tool. It sure is a good tool. And so that's those are the fronts we're faced with. Listen, sis, we got just a few more minutes, and again, I want to thank you for jumping on. If there is one word that you would want to leave our folk tonight about what's next and what you ought to be thinking about, and what you ought to be, what would motivate you? What would you say? What would inspire folk to get involved and to do something?
One of the lessons that I learned, and I've been teaching people over the years, especially with some of the, controversies we came around when we were at the Women's March, Bishop, is, again, I will say this, and I said this earlier, unity is not uniformity. That we could come to the table, Bishop, and we could work on issues together. We could build power together. And guess what? You may agree with me on 8 out of 10 things that I work on, but you may not agree with me on the 2 other things. But guess what? You and I can have a conversation about that. We could have courageous we could work through that together. This idea that in order for us to build power together, to come together, we got to unequivocally agree on everything doesn't even make logical sense. We debate within our own families. Sometimes we disagree with our, dads and moms about things. So the fact that we expect to come to movement spaces to fight for immigrants, refugees, Black people, other marginalized people, and somehow come to the table with conditions in the ways in which we organize, that's something we got to stop doing. So I'm basically saying to people, come to the movement, even if you come to a place where you may disagree with some of the issues that we're working on, some policies. But if there's something that moves you, come to that table and let's work on that. If it means that we got to go to the border to defend migrants, forget that you and I don't agree on Israel, but we do agree that the migrants shouldn't be stripped from their moms, that the migrants deserve access to asylum and to be able to apply for asylum. If you believe Black people deserve dignity and respect in this country and should live freely, if you believe that everybody should have access to healthcare, don't worry about the other things you and I don't agree on. And I mean that not just for me personally. I mean for spaces you go into where there are other people you may not agree with on everything. But sometimes we got to put our issues aside and we got to fight for each other. We cannot allow this delay to continue, these divisions to continue, because our opposition, Bishop, I promise you, they don't agree on everything either. But You know what they do know how to do? When they do agree, they are outside together, they stand together, they work together, and they'll figure out the other thing they don't agree on behind some closed doors. And that's what I'm welcoming people to, because that's something we have not learned to do amongst progressives and folks in the left. When we disagree on one thing, we walk away from each other versus saying, you know what, you and I don't agree on this, but we do agree on these 5 things. And guess what? That's where I want to work with you on. And so again, unity is not uniformity.
Thank you, sis. You are brilliant. And every time I see you doing your thing, I say that my sister here, she's doing her thing, boy. And there's a kind of pride that I experience every time I hear you, I see you, or I see your remnants. You leave a fragrance when you go. I appreciate you very much, and appreciate your work, and love and respect you highly for what you do and what you have meant to the movement work. We will see each other. We'll be out there in them streets, and we're forever related as family together. Thank you for taking this time away from your family and your work, doing what it is that you do to chop it up with me. Family, we're going to get out of here for tonight. I promise you, we're going to continue to be talking to people like Sister Linda and other leaders across this country and across our state and our communities who are doing the fight for justice. Good night, y'all. God bless. Peace. We'll see you.